behalf of Volunteer Nova Scotia and the King's Volunteer Resource Centre, welcome to Volunteer Recruitment. Is it getting harder or is it me? With presenter Max Chauvin. Max has been twice honored by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II for community leadership, service, and volunteerism. A physical chemist by trade, Max can derive the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Not that it's particularly helpful skill or in-demand party trick. Max Chauvin is a nationally certified facilitator and trainer with over 25 years of executive management and governance experience in a variety of organizations. He holds an MBA and an MSc with a specialty in strategic planning. He understands the transformative power of volunteerism and community leadership on both the volunteer and the community. He's recruited hundreds of volunteers for various organizations and causes and has served as chair of 4 different boards of directors and served on many more. Through his work, he helps organizations transform their volunteer recruitment and management processes, create highly effective boards of directors, and develop long-term strategies for success. And now, Max, you have the floor.
Great. Thank you very much. Hopefully I'm coming through clearly to everybody. So for the workshop, we are going to do some parts with us looking here, and I have some slides. We'll share the slides afterwards, so nobody has to worry about trying to copy something down. It's there for us to use. Heather did mention about the chat. If you've got a thought, something you want to share as we're working through, toss it in the chat. Heather's going to keep an eye on that as we go through the workshop, and we will make sure we'll come back to those. So let's kick ourselves off. I am going to share my screen. And right now you should see a white screen with the title of the workshop and the KVRC logo and so on the front. So let's start with a land acknowledgement that we'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which Mi'kmaq and Wolastoq peoples first signed with the British Crown in 1725. The treaties did not deal with the surrender of lands and resources, but in fact recognized Mi'kmaq and Wolastoq title and established the rules of what was to be an ongoing relationship between nations. We also acknowledge that people of African descent have been in Nova Scotia for over 400 years, and we honor and offer gratitude to those ancestors of African descent who came before us to this land. So what? I suspect that in most government and community meetings that you go to, trainings like this, you see a land acknowledgement before the meeting starts or in the first couple of items. Happens at our city councils and our town councils. And so many different things. And quite frankly, when we first started doing land acknowledgements, it was revolutionary. Nobody had heard them. Nobody knew what they were, and they were thought-provoking. My question to you now, and question that we'll be exploring throughout the workshop a couple of times, is does the land acknowledgement still have the impact that it did when we first started them? And I'll just open it up to the floor. You can just speak out unmute yourself, or you can put it in the chat. But do you find that land acknowledgements are continuing to move us towards reconciliation, or have you seen them for some folks just become a little tick box that we do to start the meeting? And somebody tossed a comment in the chat. I think they mean even more when they're personalized, was Annette's comment. And I agree, Annette. I think the examples I chose here were very, very common ones that come off the internet, which I did deliberately. Stacy mentions that Words need to be accompanied by actions. I agree with that. Anybody else with thoughts about it? People can also turn off your mic and jump in if you like. Okay. Other people, oh, there we go. I think Shannon suggests they're important, but I think they become a bit rote. So when I do board of directors training, we do this exercise and start to talk about for the group, does moving towards truth and reconciliation matter? And if it does, do land acknowledgements actually accomplish that anymore for the group? And it's a question people have to ask themselves. There's no right or wrong answer here. But what it is important that we do in terms of the land acknowledgement, but in terms of the other things we're going to talk about tonight too. Does this actually move us forward? Does what we're doing work? Does it achieve what we desire it to do? And if it doesn't, then we have to change what we're doing. And we're going to spend a lot of time over this workshop talking about how we change things in what we do. So we'll keep on trucking, but put that in your mind and think about some of the comments people have made on the side. What are we going to do with them? What are you going to do with them in your organization? I thought it was really interesting. I was at a meeting a couple months ago now, and it was just after the federal election. And Daniel Smith, who's the premier of Alberta, had come on and talked to a lot of people about Alberta separation. And a number of the Indigenous leaders in Alberta responded to that by saying, "You're welcome to leave any time," which was an interesting thing to reflect. It's their land. And so, yes, Albertans want to separate. The Indigenous viewpoint was, you can go anywhere you like, but it's our land. And we've had similar things in Halifax. Some of you may have been following the news and seen that the Mi'kmaq Friendship Center is going to build a new building, new residents, new services on the old Canadian Red Cross site down by Centennial Pool, the Halifax police station beside Citadel Hill, to give you some geographic reference. And in the negotiations that happened for that, the original plan had been to sell the building and the land from the city, who acquired it, to the Mi'kmaq Native Friendship Center. And again, this large discussion began about, is it appropriate to charge the Mi'kmaq Native Friendship Center to a land that they never surrendered in the first place? And in the end, it was exchanged for $1, which there's a legal reason for that. But it's interesting when we really start to explore and critically reflect on things that we do. And so just encourage you for that. Let's keep on trucking. And we'll go back to where we were, which was right here. And keep on going. So one of the things that is interesting, and I'd like to sort of know as we go forward, is how can I help you tonight? We've got an hour to spend together, a little more than an hour to spend together, talking about volunteerism in our community. And I'm wondering, you gave up a night to participate in this workshop. What can we do that will give you value, that will make it worth you coming, that will help you and your organization tomorrow? And again, toss if you have ideas in the chat or anything you specifically want us to tackle, or any questions you have. Also, unmute your mic and just spit it out if you like. But what do you hope to get out of tonight's workshop? New strategies to recruit and maintain volunteers. We haven't tried before, which is Kaylee's suggestion, and that gets a thumbs up from somebody else. And we will talk about some of those ideas with some specific examples. Anybody have anything else they're really hoping to get out of tonight?
I agree with what Kaylee had mentioned. It's Annette. I think one of the challenges is the trends are changing and maintaining and volunteers can be challenging. Succession planning as well. Oh, someone Shannon just mentioned that as well. But Yeah, and I think I've tried to adapt different ways in terms of like things. Years ago, it was always you need a volunteer at a certain time, a certain day, every day of the week, and a certain requirement of how long they stay with the organization. And so we kind of have to shift and roll based on what the volunteers' availability and flexibility. We have to be as flexible as we can, I think. But yeah, so all learning is good learning, so that's why I'm here.
Yeah. Well, we'll look at some specific examples of some of those things. But one of the things I would suggest is quite often we're trying to tweak what we do and how we've always done it. And I think we actually, in some cases, have to really look at it in a different way. Um, Changing landscape. So I'm going to share with you tonight some of the latest research that comes out of Volunteer Canada and some of the other organizations that do that kind of research. And hopefully that will help a little bit too. For my for my thing tonight, I really want to share with you some information. A, what's happening and what we're learning. B, what are the things that are in the way? And three, what are some things that people are doing that are working? I'm also want to share with you two very personal experiences that I had that really changed how I look at volunteerism and how I approach it. And that leads to some of what I'm certainly doing, and I know what some others have done that really is helping and allowing some organizations to move forward. And then finally, we'll look at some practical examples of what folks are doing and how they're putting that together. So we'll make sure that we tackle all of those things and go forward from there. So let's keep on trucking for a couple of minutes here. So this is one of the first things that I think is really important. What I am discovering a lot of the time is that when I'm working with volunteer groups, they are looking in the magic mirror. They are not looking out the window. And what I mean by that is when we look out, we're still hoping we can keep doing things the way we've always done them. We still think, well, people will adapt, they'll change. And the truth is, they're not going to. The world is becoming very different. What is people's schedules, time, how they look at volunteerism is different. And we need to be able to think about it differently and to really examine what's out there. And one of the things I would share where we spent some time on this with one group, some of you may be aware of IODE, International Order Daughters of the Empire. Protestant church group, has built more church halls and more things in our communities than can shake a stick at. And there was a piece of research done for IODE on volunteerism in their organization, how it was structured, what the perception was. And when they took a look at what that really meant, and they interviewed people and they talked to them, one of their things was, we are not prepared to change who we are and how we do things. And we would rather continue to focus on smaller and smaller things that we can do well rather than revolutionize who we are, because in that revolution, they felt they will lose who they are. And so encourage everybody as we talk about this and as you talk about this outside in your community, um, really take a look at what's happening and what's going on, and get rid of the biases that people may have. And for example, we'll talk about this in a few minutes, but one of the biases is that young people don't volunteer anymore. And yet all of the research tells us that young people are volunteer per capita more than any other group in society. And so when we look in the magic mirror and we talk about people don't want to volunteer, we tell ourselves things like youth don't want to volunteer. They're not interested in their community. They're not interested in helping each other. Well, that's not true. It's an issue that we have not created our systems and structures in a way that attracts them to it. You've probably heard this argument that the next generation can't focus on anything. They're 3 seconds and they're on to something else. And yet, now this was a few years ago, but we know when the Harry Potter books came out, kids who had no attention span, no interest in detail, couldn't follow anything for more than 15 seconds, sat down and read those books for hours, nonstop. So it wasn't that they couldn't, it was that we were not providing them the information in a format and in a way that engaged them. And we blamed them
What are you
when,
doing?
yeah. Sorry, Ray?
No, we're good. Sorry, I was looking elsewhere. Apologies.
Oh, no worries. Just your mic was open. So,
Yes.
um, but so we need to think about things that we need to adapt to today's volunteers. They won't adapt to what we did. One of the quotes that I grew up with, was from Muhammad Ali. Service to others is the rent you pay for your room here on earth. And I suspect some of you grew up in a similar setting that I did, where volunteering as a youth wasn't an option in my house. It wasn't that you could volunteer, or if you like to, you can. I grew up in a time when you will volunteer. I had some choice in what, but that was it. And I grew up in a time, and I think Heather said it in our introduction a little bit, uh, where organizations like the Canadian Red Cross would say, we need some help on Wednesday afternoon, and people would show up. They didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know what was asked, but it was just asked, we need help. You come and you devote. And now we find out you make a call like that and nobody shows up. So we grew up in a different time, with different expectations, with different motivations and different driving forces from our parents, and all of those different kinds of things. And we can look fondly back on those moments. I will tell you, I look fondly back on the moments when trying to organize a curling spiel or trying to organize some other kind of event. I look fondly back on the days where people just showed up every week, every time, and just jumped in and did whatever you asked when they arrived, and so on. But that's not our reality. And so, how do we adapt? How do we change? So, let's talk a little bit about, is it us and what the numbers are telling us. And so, latest stats tell us that the rates of people volunteering in informal roles, so boards of directors, committees, things like that, is down at least 9 to 10%. We see that. Informal volunteering, even the show up and help your neighbor shovel snow, do things like that, is down. What's interesting is also the total number of hours that are volunteered by people in Canada are down, and the average number of hours per person that they give is down. So we have 10% less people, essentially, volunteering, and we have almost 20% less for the group that's staying there, less in hours. So you can imagine, you combine those two factors, we have seen a huge drop in the number of volunteers and in the number of time they have to give. And so those two factors coming together really, really make things difficult. We also know that the volunteers that are staying are burned out and that they do not feel the level of satisfaction from their experience they had before. So we're going to talk tonight about burnout, and we're going to talk about how we boost volunteer satisfaction. Because we know if people are burned out and they're not satisfied, they stop volunteering. And so we are in a bit of a slide coming down that we need to figure out how to change what we're doing. We also know that women are volunteering less and their total numbers of hours are dropping by a third, which I think is really important. And I mentioned this one already. Youth volunteers volunteer the most in terms of the number of youth volunteering compared to the population, but they do not volunteer a lot of hours. And we know that older adult volunteers, the number of them are from that age demographic is the lowest percentage of seniors that are volunteering, but those that do give the most hours. And so just interesting pieces, things that don't necessarily, the research does not fit the narrative that we sometimes have going out. And so this research also asks people why. Is volunteer rates dropping? Why is the number of hours we give dropping? And so on. And these are some of the answers that get shared. People are feeling really stretched emotionally, financially, and for time. And people don't feel they have the time to share in their community away from their family like they used to. More and more people are struggling financially. Well, this is on the extreme end. We see more people struggling with homelessness. I think everybody on this call probably has noticed your grocery bill has gone up and income certainly hasn't kept up. And so it's harder for people to make donations and to spend that. And we find that what we call compassion fatigue is growing, is that we're tired, and we're tired of being asked to give more and create more. We know that the pandemic and stay at home and work remotely has had an enormous impact on how engaged we feel in our community and how connected we feel to those around us. And you can even see that in the workplace discussions that are happening right now. Employers are telling us work from home has been good for some things, but it has reduced the connection that employees have with the business, and it's reduced the connection employees have had with others. Traditional opportunities that we had to gather together for a couple of years were gone, and some people have not recovered. There's really interesting information on education and the impact that the lockdowns had on youth and on children's development who grew up and didn't have the opportunity to play with large groups of kids and things like that. And so we don't even understand all of the long-term impact that this has had, but it's huge. And we need to know about, and we need to be aware of that and thinking about that. We know that required in-person participation is beginning to grow again, but there are some resentments to it. And that again is disengagement. This is a stat from a different study that tells us that no more than 1 in 3 volunteers want to serve on a board of directors. Part of that is the length of the commitment, the frequency of meetings, and so on. And one of the things I'm going to talk to you about in solution is, can we reduce the frequency of board meetings? And I'm going to give you a great example of an organization that has found enormous volunteer success by reducing the size of their board and doing something else instead. We do know that people say that they don't feel included, they don't feel welcome, and they don't feel easily able to get places and get there. We know that people feel that they don't have the skills to do what's asked of them and don't want to be placed in a situation where they feel inadequate, they feel that they're being judged. A huge one, and one that is becoming more and more common, is that people don't feel that when they agree to volunteer, they are onboarded and supported well. And that leads to burnout and fatigue, and they go away. And we've already mentioned burnout and emotional fatigue is the answer. So those are some of the information that very much we have a volunteer crisis going on. And these are some of the answers. What I want to share, I would share with you two perspective changes that really moved my thinking on volunteerism and what I needed to do with the organizations that I volunteer with or have a leadership role in. So one of the things that I do in my volunteer space is I work with people who have disabilities. And specifically, right now, I am the chair of the Accessibility Advisory Board for the province of Nova Scotia. And we talk, obviously, a lot about disability and how it presents itself and the challenges. And one of the discussions that we have had is about models of disability. And if you're interested in this topic, you can dig into this, just type in models of disability into Google, and you get lots of things. And we have talked about disabilities sometimes from a moral perspective. It's karma. It's all about the person and their failure. And there's lots of, not that I'm at all suggesting that it was the right model to be looking at it, but it's how we looked at disability at one point. It was a character flaw. It was poor thinking. It was bad choices. It was karma. We then have also adopted at times a medical model for disability. And it's perceived as an impairment, or it's perceived as a failure of the system or function. And the goal is finding ways to repair the system or function or bring it to as close as normal as possible. There's also then a social model. And that's what I want to talk to you about, because when I was introduced to this, it changed my thinking. The social model of disability views disability as the result of society's barriers, not an individual's impairment. Societal obstacles such as physical inaccessibility and negative attitudes are what disable people. And these can be removed by changing the environment and the social structures. The goal is to make society more inclusive so that disabled people can participate fully in life. And it was interesting. When a person who is in a wheelchair faces the disability, faces the inability to participate fully in life when they run into the stairs with no other option. The person who experiences or is deaf can't live a full life when they run into the obstacle of communication that is not provided in a way that they're able to process it. One of the most exciting things that a couple of friends of mine experienced during the pandemic was when government started to dramatically increase the amount of communication that was made with translation services. It was unheard of. And it was changing the societal structure, the societal barrier, not focusing on the disability. And so focusing on the barriers, removing those barriers, and empowerment of folks is a different way of thinking about it. And what for me triggered when I studied this and I learned some more about it was, what are the barriers that we as volunteer organizations, as volunteer leaders, put in front of those that would be willing and are willing to contribute to our community, but cannot get through the barrier, cannot find a way to participate fully and do what they want. And so if we look at barriers, here are 11 items that got talked about when we talk about barriers, and we've seen some of them before. Lack of time. One of them is inflexible roles. And we're going to talk about things like that. And an interesting example that I've shared with before was when schools adopted a 6 or a 7 day cycle for education. In other words, Monday was not always Monday, because on a 6 day cycle, Monday through Friday is 1 to 5. Monday is day 6 in the next week. The next time you get one, so the same schedule, is on Tuesday. And if we look at that type of scheduling, it became that every Tuesday isn't every Tuesday for students. One week it's Tuesday. The next day it's actually Monday. And then because of a holiday in the third week, it's actually a Friday in terms of what schedule people have to follow. So how do we adapt to that? How do we change to that? Right, a lot of people talk to us about getting access. How do I get places? We talk to a lot of people who tell us gas is expensive and getting around is difficult. We've talked about people who are frustrated and tired, and what do? We've talked about people low confidence, and do we actually inspire people to come to our work and feel that they've got the ability to be successful? We have huge reports of how undervalued people feel, even in organizations that do all sorts of recognition activities. We find that. We've mentioned poor onboarding, lack of diversity and inclusion. The number of times that we look around the room, whatever that room is, virtual, physical, and we realize we do not look like our community. We do not look like those that we're going to serve. And people recognize that and expect better. Limited digital infrastructure. We talk about this all the time. Let's move it online. Let's put it online. And yet realizing that many in our community don't have the capability of that, and we leave them out. We know that values are changing. What we value is different than what the generation coming up behind us and the group behind that have. And we need to adapt to that. And we also know with growing numbers of newcomers, language and cultural practices are difficult, and we need to find ways to deal with that. So I want you to at least consider thinking about the challenges to volunteerism. What do you put as the leader, as the organization, between the volunteer and the work that needs to be done, and realizing that it is our job to beat that down? It is our job to reduce the barrier as much as humanly possible to get people to come in and join. So that's one. I said, and I mentioned in the beginning, I have two of these that I want you to think about and look at it differently. And this one, I can't take credit for. I can't really take credit for the other one. It was somebody who introduced that conversation. But I was doing work with military family resource centers. And if you don't know, most military bases or military communities have a military family resource center. And their purpose is to support the families of men and women who serve, and they do childcare and they do things like that. And we were really struggling in a couple of them to figure out volunteerism and how do we get it? How do we get people there and how do we bring them on board? And this was a comment that somebody made that, again, for me, changed dramatically how I thought about volunteers. And this person stood up and said, what if the volunteer opportunity was the purpose, was the program? And this may not be true for all of our organizations, but for military family resource centers, the opportunity to volunteer, to get out of your house, to contribute to the culture of the community, to serve, was more important in many cases than the service itself. Because the benefit for the volunteer is why they needed to volunteer. It's why they needed it, why they needed to participate. And we started to look at, what if we treated volunteerism like it was a program unto itself, like the purpose of using volunteers, of recruiting volunteers, was to serve the volunteer. So it led to some revolutionary work in family resource centers. I'm not suggesting that in every organization we should adopt that philosophy, but what if they can stand side by side? The service that we're doing, the needs we're trying to fulfill in our community, stand side by side with the benefits to the volunteer. We must work on both. And so what I challenge, and what I'm going to share with you about some approaches, is look at the volunteer as getting as much or maybe even more out of their service than what they're contributing to. And when you start to think differently about it, you'll behave differently. So let me share with you some thoughts out of that, and then we'll then go on and probably take a break in a couple of minutes and then come back. So what I'm talking is looking at volunteerism as its own benefit to the volunteer. And what I've labeled this as participant, as volunteer-centered approaches in your organization. And these are 7 things that, if we do a person-centered approach, we will do well. First off is know our audience: age, skill, cultural background, motivation. And so we've done some audits of organizations that are struggling with volunteerism. And we've come in and we've asked them, what do you know about the people in your organization? And these were organizations with some defined membership, which I know some groups aren't. But we really sat down and talked about who has what skills. Do you know? Because it's going to play out later. No, we really don't know. And so we need to spend more time looking at and talking to our volunteers. We call it, in other work, lived and living experience. We need to spend time talking to our volunteers about what makes you feel safe, what makes you feel comfortable. Why do you want to volunteer? And I'll go back to my Muhammad Ali quote. Nobody asked, nobody cared, quite frankly, in my memories of my early volunteer opportunities. But now we have to ask that. We have to know people. We have to know background. We have to know why they want motivation. We've got to spend a lot of time talking to people. We'll come back a little later and talk about some very specific things to do around recruitment, but it'll all involve that. We have to encourage people to participate. And we are finding more and more when we go into a community and ask people, why aren't you volunteering? They will tell us, Nobody asked me. And I'll share an example of this and what we did with it later on in the workshop. But tons and tons of people will say nobody asked. And so in Ontario, there was a volunteer group that did a lot of research on how people got involved in volunteerism. More than 70% of people who volunteered did so because they were asked one-on-one by somebody to volunteer with some detailed information and some specifics. There is no success in posting volunteer, or shouldn't say no, there will obviously be some, but there won't be big success in posting volunteer notices in the church bulletin or in the newsletter or in the counselor's weekly or monthly note that they put out to constituencies or notices in the newspaper. There will be some, but the real secret will come in how we ask people to participate. And I will give you a very, very specific example when we get into some really practical, here's what I need you to do, suggestions around that. We need to promote inclusion and accessibility. We need to find out why certain groups of people aren't coming. And this could be youth, it could be seniors, it could be people from different gender, people from different parts of the community. For those of you who've been through Port Hawkesbury up in Cape Breton, this is a really funny one because it was one of my first encounters with this. When you drive into Port Hawkesbury, there is a town. There is a big hill. And I remember asking a question about who isn't here in your community, who is not represented. And they said, well, the people who are over the hill. And I mentioned, I thought that was a rather disrespectful way to talk about older adults or seniors. And somebody pointed out, no, it's geographic. We don't talk to the people who live over the hill, and yet they're part of our community. But it could be whatever it is do you have people with disabilities in your group? Do you have all that different kind of experience? Do you have people with different professional experience and so on? And how do you develop that? And without it, you are turning off volunteers. People need choice. It used to be we could ask, here's what the deal is, and people would sign up. Not true anymore. People need choice and autonomy, and I'll give you some examples of that. When I again come and do these audits, I reference two things. Most organizations have a mission statement. If you have a mission statement, it should answer three questions. Who are we? What do we do? And whom do we do it for? And a vision statement should say, what is the dramatic difference we want to make in the world? So I often, when doing these groups, will sit down with folks and I'll give them some blank paper. And I will tell them, in your own words, tell me the dramatic difference your service is going to make in the world. And invariably, I get blank stare. Some of you who may have been involved in the literacy community, we were really struggling for volunteers. And we did this exercise. We brought people together. We had an event. And we asked people these mission vision and said, what is literacy about? And we got answers about it's teaching people to read, it's teaching people to look at their numbers and things like that. And what we went back and worked with folks on is that wasn't what literacy was about at all, if we're going to align with mission and vision. Literacy about is being able to read a story to your child. It's about being able to see what's on special at the grocery store. It's about being able to do things at work. It's about being able to apply for a leadership position in a company or in an organization. And one of the things that we started to talk to people about was we as leaders have to express what our organization does, what the benefits are, in a way that excites people and that aligns with difference, that aligns with that dramatic difference. And it's about who we are and what we do. And it's very interesting. As we started to do that, we ran into some obstacles. So one of our next questions was, well, what do you think of when we say somebody's illiterate? And we got stupid, uneducated. And one of the interesting ones is we got a lot of people thought, well, they're criminals. And again, knowing that, we went back and we again tied a mission and vision. We had literacy volunteers now able to go out and say things like, we're working with people who have dyslexia, had this, had that, and are really desperately trying to improve their lives to do this, this, and this. And for those organizations we worked with, they saw huge improvements in volunteer recruitment and volunteer retention because they stopped talking about teaching people to read and they talked about who they serve and the dramatic difference it makes. Participant center approaches, do we evaluate? And so I mentioned this idea of what if volunteerism was the program? What if it was the purpose and it stands side by side? We do tons of evaluation of our programs, surveys, net promoter score, all sorts of things. How many times do we put that level of evaluation into the volunteer experience? And I will tell you, for most organizations, we don't do any of that, though there are some that do. But we need to put as much energy, maybe even more, into the evaluation of the volunteer experience, because without the volunteers, we don't deliver the program at all. And then clarity of communication. And again, new volunteers particularly tell us that communication is really poor. And you'll see this when, if you're operating programs and services, the new people come in, they're often not sure what's happening, where to go, what to do. We do that to our volunteers all the time, and we wonder why it doesn't work out well. So, two perspective changes. Where the barrier and how do we remove it versus changing the person? And secondly, to consider the volunteer experience as in alongside with the program and service experience, and that both need to win, both need to be successful. So it's
There's a
10
whole bunch
minutes
of
to
comments.
8.
Sorry, we have a
Oh, well,
few
let's go.
comments, and one of the things that people
Let's
have identified is that they'd like to know more about the onboarding process, but there are a number of
Yep.
comments in here. So,
So let's tackle on. Let's go hit some of those.
okay.
What should we know about the changing landscape of
Mm,
volunteer and how it? Okay.
I think you've
We've
kind of
tackled
gone
on
over
some of
that.
those things.
Yeah.
How do you get members to join the executive? Well, I think my experience would be, and we'll talk about this when we come back, but traditionally, when we talk about executives on boards, about things like that, we talk way too much about the organization and way too little about the person. And so we'll come back and I'll give you an example of something to think about that. Absolutely, cost of volunteerism. And we are seeing more and more organizations trying to put some form of honorarium together to help with volunteerism. Youth volunteerism by school. We'll come and talk about that in the second half. We'll talk about the onboarding. And getting paid on board with volunteers is absolutely a challenge. One of the things that I do find is if we raise it to the same level as the program outcome, if we evaluate it and staff are being evaluated on the volunteer experience, and it's something we talk about all the time, you will see changes in that. It's from the staff point of view, quite often volunteerism is more work, or it's such a hassle to recruit them up and things like that. And there's frustrations. But once we say, no, fundamental to how we work and how we operate is volunteers. And that's an equal measure towards success. We'll do better. But let's take a break let's come back at 8 o'clock and we'll get into some very practical ways to put some of this in place. and I'll give you some quick and fire examples of what groups have done. So let's take 8 minutes and come back, and then we'll go through the last part of this, which is all about opportunities and very specific things that you can do. All right, let's get back on. So we've talked a little bit about some of the stats, some of the proof that we're having problems. We've talked about some of the barriers that people report. Two, I hope, mind shifts that were helpful to you, as they certainly were to me. So let's go in and now start talking about, okay, what do we do with this now that we've talked about it? And if I've done this right, you should see Luke Skywalker. So this for me is a very fundamental, again, lesson or mind shift. It comes from a book and a consulting practice called Storyboard, if anybody's really interested in diving deeper into this. But in that process, it's about marketing, it's about communication, it's about presenting things. And the author tells us, and I think rightly so, that everybody wants to be Luke Skywalker. Everybody wants to be the hero of their story, of the story. It's all about him. And we often are Obi-Wan. We're the experienced hands, the people that have that knowledge and knows what's best and has all this history and so on and so forth. The problem being is nobody aspires to be Obi-Wan. People want to be Luke Skywalker. People want to be the hero of their own story. And so as we start to think about opportunities, the first one that I'm going to suggest we need to do is we need to make our volunteers successful. And one of the ways that we do that is a good onboarding process. So when you look around your organization, when you look around your volunteer table, whether it's scouting leaders or brownie leaders, whether it's special events, fundraising, working with children, youth, doesn't matter. When you look around that group and you think about somebody new joining, what do we need to do so that they will be a rock star? What do they need to know? What do they need to understand? What do they need to do well? And we'll talk about boards of directors as one of the first ones. When somebody new joins a board, and I at one point joined the board of the United Way, so large charity, I've been on a couple of very large multi-million-dollar charity boards, and I remember watching people come in. I remember being the new board member, and you sit there and you go, I don't know when to speak. I don't know when to share. I don't know any. I'll just sit here and be quiet. Well, I'm not having a good experience. I'm not being successful. I'm not contributing. So we need to look at, as we welcome new volunteers in, what do we do that will make them relatively quickly feel like rock stars in our organization? And so a good example, again, I'll use with organizations where budgets are a piece, is I've talked to people, interviewed people 3 and 4 years into an organization who tell me they don't know how to read the financial statement. They feel dumb as posts because everybody else is nodding their heads and so on. We chose, by not teaching them how to read the financial statement, to make them feel less than adequate every single time they come to work as a volunteer. What do we have to do to make them feel successful? and it'll be different for every organization, but you should have laid out when a new volunteer comes in, here's what we do. There are video trainings that we can ask people to watch. There are United Way, I mentioned, big organization. What they do is they ask one of their current volunteers, be it on a committee, be it on the board, be it on one group, to take the new person out for coffee. And if needed, they'll pay for the coffee so that the person meets somebody, they know somebody now, they ask that volunteer to make sure that when that person comes to their first meeting, they're introduced around. They're not left standing in the corner holding water, whatever it is, they're brought right in. Transforms the experience. What do people need to know before you ask them to do something? It's all of those things, but I will tell you the number one thing you need to do is make them feel welcome. As I mentioned, I think already, I've done some work with churches. And when I go into a new church and new people show up, in some churches, you watch people do a little shuffle on the pew, not to make space, but to make what might have been seen as a space disappear so the person doesn't sit with them. And then we wonder why church attendance and all those kind of pieces is dropping in some of those institutions. We don't make them feel welcome. So onboarding, it's about information. It's about giving them what they need so they can contribute. When we do our first meeting, I want people to feel they can share something. And so I started you with the land acknowledgement and so what. My so what for that is to learn from Indigenous meeting practices. And one of the things that I've studied a little bit is the old talking stick practice. You have the talking stick, you can speak. When you get the stick, it's your turn to speak. What we don't generally tell people is when it's your turn to speak, you cannot comment on what the person said before. You share your truth, goes round the room, and then we don't go round the room again. We sit with that and we'll come back to it at a later time. Create that experience on your board that everybody knows you can share your opinion, your thought. It may slow you down a little bit because you're going to have to come back to it the next meeting to get the decision, but you'll probably come to a better decision with more time on it. And you will build immediately into your organization this understanding that people can speak and that their opinion is welcome and that they don't have to agree with everybody else. So let's keep on going. Let's talk about flexible, short-term, and remote volunteering. We know people do not want long commitment. I shared with you one stat, 1 in 3 interested in sitting on the board. Actually, that was 1 in 4, 1 in 3 want to sit on the board. People in general are moving away from long-term, every second Monday of the month type meetings. Can we do flexible short-term? Can it be remote? And so quite often what we want when we recruit people is we want a communications chair on our board. And I've got one group that is doing some building work. They want a construction chair and so on. And they were having horrible times recruiting. And what we discovered was they could get people to help with communication. They just didn't want to go to meetings all the time. And they actually could get some young people who had really cool ideas and were the masters of Canva and social media. We're keen to help, but they weren't going to come to a meeting every month or things like that. So what did they do? They recruited them for communication and actually took the communication piece as a job off the board and gave it out as projects. No more problem with that kind of work. And the building folks, I've got a group of folks that are working on a building and they want somebody as a construction person and with that kind of experience to sit on the board. Hard to find somebody, but it turns out when they asked, We need some construction advice. We have 10 questions that we want people to answer, and wondered if you'd come together for a couple of hours and answer them for us. They had half a dozen people ready to do that, no issue, because it was short term, it was flexible, and it was very, very specific. So, in both of the examples I've given you, I've got organizations that are reducing their board of directors to 5 people who will do the governance piece, and they are going to do all of the work with other volunteers who it turns out are happy to help them. Now, this may not apply in your organization, but in these 2 organizations, it's been life-changing for them. The 5 board members don't pick up all that work. What they do is we pick up some more work in bringing people in for these short-term assignments, but they're getting more done, they're getting it done faster, and it's better quality. Activism. We have discovered that youth, particularly, really want to speak about the problems and the injustices that they're seeing. And we have traditionally, in a lot of volunteer organizations, been silent on that. Find a way to allow people to speak out on the issues that you're dealing with. And you're going to have to balance that with commitment to funders and things like that. But working quiet in the background is not how everybody wants to work. If you can create some opportunity for awareness building and activism and talking about that, you will attract some new volunteers. Somebody mentioned school volunteerism, corporate responsibility, all those kind of programs. There are lots of them. You volunteer in school, you get a credit. You want to be a branch manager at Royal Bank, you're told on your first day in your orientation that you will volunteer in the community, and if you don't, you'll never get there. Every accounting clerk, law clerk that comes in does at some point get told, you must serve and volunteer in the community if you want to get ahead. Now, some people talk about these things as well, they're being forced and it's not going to be good work. I'll guarantee you, the law clerk, the accounting clerk, the student from NSCC does not want to sit on your committee 12 meetings a year, but they would love to do a project that's related to their studies because they can put it in their portfolio, which will help them with marks in their college and help with getting a job afterwards. But we're back to flexible, short-term, sometimes remote opportunities. We need to think about it differently. People always, one of the things that years ago people talked to me about was, it's so hard to find a treasurer, Max. And I start sending people, when the accounting clerks come out, when people start the mass hirings in accounting firms and banks and so on happen, talk to the branch managers, talk to the partners of the firm and tell them, we have an opportunity if you have somebody who's keen. Is it a corporate responsibility being pushed to do it? Yes. Will they do a good job? Almost invariably they will. Also think about corporations that are trying to do volunteerism and community development work as part of what they're doing. They'll be keen. Youth-led. I will tell you from all of the research we have on anything for youth, the number one complaint youth have is that they get given something maybe to do, but it's not really a job. Somebody else is covering on it. They don't get to lead it. You need to create opportunities for youth to lead. And we go back to make me successful. The answer to youth leadership and letting them lead is to make sure they have all the information they need to do the work. We're finding a lot of success in hyper-local, really focusing in people's neighborhoods and so on where they're going. We talk to people about volunteers about the health benefits. Helps with depression, lowers blood pressure. Being active is important. If you're giving the skills to be successful, then you're helping people develop skills and be bigger, better, faster, stronger to do their work. And emphasize the social connection. We know that people are desperate for it. But it means creating a time for that. If social connection is something that's important to your group of volunteers, to your group of people, if it's why they want to participate, then you need to create it. And that means you need time for it to happen. Maybe it's staying after the meeting and everybody gets to chat. Maybe it's a little bit of food. There are lots of ways to do it. But if people are screaming for the social connection, you need to look at it. We know that burnout is a huge problem. How do we know if people are burned out? The five big signs: exhaustion. Somebody who used to be upbeat and full of ideas is becoming more and more of a cynic. People's inability to get things done. We see changes in behavior. We see physical symptoms. They change how they stand, how they walk, how they carry themselves. As leaders, we need to watch out for this in ourselves, and we need to watch out for it in others. And again, the research tells us what creates burnout? Too much work for someone to do, lack of control of what's going on. We know that people need to have a say in their experience and what they're doing. Make me successful. Make sure the expectations are clear. When you bring a new volunteer, have a checklist of these are the things we're going to talk to them about, show them about, do with them so that they're there. Recognition, and I will tell you, people feeling that it's unfair is the kiss of death. So we're not clinicians, we're not people who can diagnose things and so on, but we are people who can talk with our volunteers. How's it going? How are you feeling? You've got a lot on your plate. Is it okay? When I do training for boards of directors, one of the things I suggest they should do is have a time with staff in a safe setting and ask the staff, do you have the tools and resources to do everything we're asking of you? And the number of times that staff will go, I've been here 20 years and nobody once has ever asked me that. Same is true for volunteers. Burnout is one of the biggest things. We're running out of time, stress, causing us all these things. We need to start dealing with it. And one of the pieces may be we cannot do everything we want to do. And instead of trying to do everything but doing it not great, have the courage to stop doing something and refocus on what you can do with what capacity you've got. You again will be amazed at the difference that can make. And the truth is, you also need to know that burnout happens when it has nothing to do with you at all. The causes of burnout may not relate to your volunteerism or your volunteer activity. It may be from somebody's work or something else, or family life and home life. But be watchful for this and have open and gentle conversations with people to hopefully address this before it becomes the person who everybody doesn't want to talk to, that everybody tries to shy away from, or the person that walks away in shame and never ever wants to come back or be involved because we didn't help them. I mentioned we talked to volunteers, and I said that I did this in an organization. This was a United Way project in Truro. And they was saying that you need to find new people. And they said to me, Max, there are no volunteers left in Truro. I said, okay. How many people live in Truro? And we had some debate about that because of the Bible Hill count and so on. But anyway, we agreed there's about 16,000 people in Greater Truro. I gave them flip chart pages and pens, and I said, write down the name of everybody you've talked to in the past 3 to 6 months about volunteering. And then I stood there for 20 minutes because they were sort of like not really understanding how serious I was about writing the names down. But they wrote some names down. I said, okay, cross off everybody who used to be a volunteer and you're trying to bring them back, and cross off your best friend and your brothers and sisters. And they were left with about 5 names. And I said, fair enough. I think you've probably forgotten a bunch of people. But I said, there is no statistical model in the world that supports the fact that even if you've talked to 25 people, 15,975 people are going to say no. So what we gave them was this task. Every meeting starts with, hello, how are you? Do your agenda. And then each member must share 5 names, 2 names, they could choose whatever they wanted, of new people that they had never asked before to volunteer. Now, that was probably 10 years ago, and that organization has yet to run into a problem recruiting volunteers. But they spend a huge amount of time talking to new people. And we go back to how do we make people successful and communication. That organization spends a huge amount of time helping people talk to new people who they have not participated before, to not put pressure on people, but also when they talk to somebody, to make that person the hero, to make that person Luke Skywalker. So the conversation starts something like this. Hi, I volunteer with ABC Recreation Association, and I'm wondered if you spare me 5 minutes at lunch to talk to you about it. And people are sort of wary and go there, and they say, look, here's what we do. And it wasn't we teach people to read. It is that much more mission, vision focused, the dramatic difference. If you cannot describe the change that you want to make in the lives of people in your community in a dramatic fashion, that's where you got to start. Then tell people why you're asking them. We need new people. What skills are you looking for? We're asking you because I've seen you've been really good with numbers, or you talk about all the home projects you do in renovations, and we need somebody who might be able to help us with doing this or that. You're interested in this. I think you'd be a great fit. We're really trying to work with more youth, and quite frankly, there's more of us with gray hair than not, and we'd love to have somebody come on board. But the whole conversation is not, it's targeted towards the person. It's targeted towards, we are asking you and we need you because you're special, because you have gifts and talents that we need. Be really clear on what you're asking for. But before you start those conversations, have done that grooming to reduce things down to flexible and those kind of pieces. We talked about making things, that was the piece, 72% of people who successfully come in to volunteer do it because they were asked one-on-one by a person. All the ads, all the other stuff that groups are doing generally are a colossal waste of time compared to having a strategy to go talk to 2 people, 5 people between meetings, or whatever those pieces are. And if you can do, I'll tell you, every group that's done it has come back and said, solve the problem. Same workshop I was doing in Port Hawkesbury, and I had somebody also make the comment that, well, there's nobody left to talk to, there's nobody new. And we had one lady in the back of the room over in the corner who stood up when somebody said that, and she said, I've lived here 6 months and not a single person has asked me about volunteering or being involved in the community. And she said, I've got friends who are in the same boat. Now, the bad news for her was she didn't make it to the door before she was mobbed by people with volunteer opportunities. But it was, again, this proof. There are lots of people. We have in HRM and in other parts of the province, we have this influx of new immigrants who don't get asked to volunteer. And we need to find a way to get there. And if that's something you're stuck with, let me know. I can share with you some ideas about that. People talk about the great volunteer experience. So these are 8 things that we have recognized in talking to volunteers about what makes it a great experience. People need to feel safe and secure. And start having that conversation. Do you feel safe and comfortable? This is going out to volunteers and going out to people who perhaps have left your organization or have never ever been willing to consider it. I call it the test of threes. Find three people who currently volunteer, three people who used to, and three people who you've asked but have said no, and ask them, what do you think about volunteering with our organization? What's it like, or what would it be like? And you're looking for signs. I don't feel safe when I go. I don't feel that I'm going to be respected. I don't feel that people care about me. If you have not seen the eyes and the teeth of your volunteers recently, nobody has smiled. Is it fun? Is it fair? I mentioned that's one of the things that we know about. Fairness is a huge issue. The solution to fairness is transparency. Everything is laid out in advance. Leadership has to be shared. All of those things. People need to feel like they belong. And that is one of the examples in the onboarding I gave you is when the new person comes, somebody must be assigned to meet them, introduce them to people, talk to them afterwards, call after the first meeting, call after the second meeting, take the person out to coffee. All of that must be there so if people feel they belong. People must feel recognized and appreciated for what they've done. People must know that they've made a difference. So I mentioned earlier, we use it in recruitment, linked to mission and vision. People must know that my contribution made a difference. And again, when I do audits, this is a question I ask people. Please tell me what you've done in the past year. They tell me. Then I take the mission statement and I go, please tell me specifically how what you did led to that. And I will tell you the number of people who can't tell me that tells me that organization is in trouble. Organizations that do this great experience well make sure, and it's in their recognition and it's in what they talk about, that we make a difference and it's specific to the person. And we need to talk about that. Corporate work safety culture changed years ago, and we started talking more and more about safety, and it becomes part of the everyday conversation. And it dramatically changed in organizations, the safety for volunteers and staff. Do we do that? People want to grow. They want to leave their experience better. And are we talking about that? And at some point in every great experience volunteers have had, there was a moment of surprise. There was a wow moment. Something sort of made them step out and go, that was cool. If we want to retain volunteers, if we want to recruit volunteers, if we want people out there saying you should volunteer with them, they're a pretty cool place. This is the experience that people need to create. It needs to include these things. I did touch on recognition. I want to just give people a couple of thoughts here. Do something different. Like we've got the everybody walk on stage and they have the annual dinner and everybody gets up and does this. What we've discovered is 50% of people hate that and they dread it. Let's look at some different things. And I've put some different ideas here on the page, but things like I have a group that sends thank you notes to the family, to the wife or the kids of the volunteers, recognizing they gave up family time to come and help. And I will tell you, nothing changes the conversation when you come home and find out that something was done, a thank you was sent to your partner, to your kids, to whoever, to say that the organization recognized that you were giving up time that was important to your family to help, and that it sparks new kind of conversations. The best thing ever is a thank you from participants and beneficiaries. I've shared this story before. There was a great minor sport organization that trained every athlete to line up in front of the umpire after the game, shake their hand and say, thank you for umping my game. And they saw substantial changes in volunteer retention rates and volunteer satisfaction rates. So lots of other ideas there. Lastly, I leave you with the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy back cover that says, "Don't panic." And the reason I leave us here with that is we've talked about a lot of things. I've shared some ideas. We've gone for 90 minutes. Um, I hope you've got some different ideas. My thing is here, any of these things, any of this, let me reconsider volunteerism in light of how we consider it as equal to the value of the program, and that we consider volunteers differently. We consider the barriers differently. We consider um, what we can do and how do we change our experience. And maybe it is things like we shrink our board. We get down to a board that just focuses on governance and we farm out the operational details in a different way. Um, there's lots of things like that. We really lean into when a new volunteer shows up, that we make sure that they are welcomed and that they're going to be successful and they know that we value them and that they can be there. Whatever it may be, don't try and change two things at once. Look at what you think might make the most difference and start there. And if you don't know where to start, the first place is to sit down with a bunch of volunteers and past volunteers and say, what is volunteering like? What makes sense? And ask them those links to mission and vision, to purpose, to those things. Because if those are aligned, you will not have volunteer problems. It's when they're not aligned that you run into those challenges. So it's 8:30. I want to wrap up. I will be sending the handouts over to the folks at the volunteer center, and they will send them out. At the end of that handout, I will put my contact information. If you want to bounce an idea by, you want to talk about something, always game. Send me an email. We'll set a time up, chat. And Heather, back to you.